Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Good morning to everyone. I am so honored to be here talking to you about our long-term partnership in Indonesia and the work we've been doing on orangutan behavior and orangutan conservation. And this is really building on 20 years of research and education partnerships between our universities, between Rutgers University, Universitas Nasional, University of Pulau Raya, and several other universities that have brought students to this very special place that I'll be talking to you about today. Next. So most of the global biodiversity hotspots of the world lie within the tropical regions. And Indonesia is one of these incredibly important biodiversity hotspots. Next. In fact, Indonesia has been called a key country in increasing the global efforts to preserve genetic, species, and ecosystem diversity. And it is this diversity that brought me to Indonesia in 2004 for the first time. Next. When I first went to Indonesia, I went as a postdoctoral fellow, working with Dr. Karl van Schuyt, Dr. Suci Utan at Vogel from Universitas Nasional, and Dr. Maria van Norven. And I thought to myself, this is a 2-year postdoc, I'll do my 2-year postdoc, I'll study orangutans, and then we'll see what's next. I fell in love with Indonesia, I fell in love with the people in Indonesia, and I fell in love with just the incredible students that I had the privilege of mentoring during those 2 years as a postdoc. And in 2003, the Tuanan Research Station, we call it the Tuanan Orangutan Research Station, was built and constructed as a place to really be able to study the behavior of orangutans in a very unique peatland habitat in central Kalimantan. Next. So, as you can see, the Tuanan Orangutan Research Station, there's a little yellow star on the bottom map there. It's located in central Kalimantan on the island of Borneo. And as I mentioned, this is a peat swamp habitat. So there are several other long-term orangutan research stations within Indonesia, but very few of them focus on peatland ecology and orangutans living in these peatland habitats. Next. And these peatland habitats are extremely important habitats for orangutans. As you can see, about a third of the world's orangutans are found just within these peatland habitats. And I'm very lucky to work in an area called the Mawas Conservation Area. It's a 365,000 hectare reserve in central Kalimantan that is managed by KPHL, BKSDA, and the Borneo Orangutan Survival Foundation, a yayasan within Indonesia. And they've partnered with the universities to run the research at the station for training students, both foreign and Indonesian. This area has approximately 3,500 orangutans, so one of the largest populations, entire populations of orangutans, but also it's not in a national park. So it's the only orangutan research station outside of a national park, but within a protected area. Next. And these Indonesian peatland habitats have incredible biodiversity. This is just a snapshot of some of the species found at the research station that we've collected over the years there. And we're doing much more work monitoring biodiversity now. We've started a few new projects. Next. And this is what the station looks like. And this is kind of my home away from home. We built this station in 2003. We started out with one small room with funding from USAID and partnerships across the Pacific program. We built this entire new dormitory where we can now home 30 people, 30 researchers at a time, and several of our research staff, our local staff that work there. And as you can see, it's become a wonderful environment for student working, both international and Indonesian students who work together. And you'll see that through these pictures that I show you. Next. The station has a laboratory, it has we just added this summer. We built the outdoor learning room classroom this summer, and this is our study abroad program that we run together with Universitas Nacional, Rutgers University, and the University of Plantaria. And you can see some of the students learning at the table and our daily evening meals together. Next. And this is really built on an incredible long-term true partnership with Universitas Nacional. When I started at Rutgers in 2011, we immediately signed a new memorandum of understanding with UNAS. And altogether, since that time, we brought in over $2.8 million in funding that have funded over 160 students, many of which were Indonesian students. We have 3 PhD students from Indonesia that have come to Rutgers. I'm currently a co-advisor to one of those students in the Department of Ecology and Evolution. And we've also had 3 master's students coming to Indonesia, one of which just started this fall with us as part of the LPDP program. We've had 4 workshops at Rutgers with Indonesian faculty and several Fulbright scholars that have come to Rutgers University as faculty members and graduate students. And this has amounted to over 50 joint publications between UNAS and Rutgers faculty and University of Zurich, who was another partner with us until 2018. We've run 7 joint study abroad programs since 2014. We just ran our last program this summer very successfully with 12 students from Rutgers and 15 students from UNAS and University of Plantaria. And we've also run 10 training workshops at this station as well. And I hope you all will reach out to me and come visit us when you're back in Indonesia, because it's truly a wonderful experience. Next. The Tuanon Research Station currently employs over 30 local residents from the community along the Kapuas River. The village is known as Pasir Putih. The village right next to Pasir Putih is Tuanon. When we first started, there were only 2 households in Pasir Putih. Everyone lived in Tuanon, so we called the station Tuanon. But since that time, everyone has moved to Pasir Putih, so then they don't have to take a boat to get to the research station in the morning for work. So most of the households in 20 years, have moved to Pasir Putih. As I said, we've trained over 200 researchers, and during this time, we've also collected long-term climate data on weather and particulate matter in the atmosphere. We have long-term tree phenology plots where we monitor the same trees, 2,500 trees every month for the last 20 years for fruiting and flowering and flushing of new leaves. And of course, we've conducted probably over 20,000 follows on wild orangutans over these 20 years. We have approximately 120 individuals that we can identify by name and by their facial characteristics, and we've been following their trajectories, their lives for the past 20 years. We've also studied a number of other species at the site, and we've also done a number of other topics at the site. So this is just kind of a summary of some of the research topics that we've been able to study on wild orangutans, including life history, genetics in collaboration with the Eijkman Institute, which is now part of BRIN, reproductive hormones, social networks, behavior and culture, and the list goes on and on of these incredible apes. Next. And as I said, this research station is more than just collecting data on wild orangutans. This research station is supporting a global community of our future conservation biologists. And that's really the intention of this station, is to provide Indonesian, as Satu, as Dua, as Tiga students with the training to continue this research into the future. So this is really our main focus. Next. And this is just some pictures of some of the Indonesian students that we've been fortunate enough to work with on their master's theses, studying the ecology using drones, studying biodiversity using camera traps, and studying the nutrition of orangutan foods, and samples which are also analyzed with BRIN in collaboration with BRIN. Next. And as you can see, we have also focused a lot of our attention on the training of women in the STEM sciences, because globally women are typically underrepresented in the STEM sciences. So this is just a graph of the number of women and female and male students that we've trained, both from Indonesia and internationally. Next. We also run several workshops at the station and focus on community capacity building, both at the station and within the local region where we work along the Kapuas River. And these are just some examples of the workshops that we run with the local community, in the research station, and also some of the community projects that we've worked on, including clean water and education workshops on clean water. Next. And what's really important, and I think we can just see this, is that this research station serves as promoting conservation in this really incredible and valuable habitat. So you can see what the station looked like, what the area looked like in 2002. This was just after the really big fires in 2002, and a lot of the forest was lost in this area. Since that time, because the station is there, this forest has had the ability to regenerate. And you can see in front of camp how much that forest has grown. Now we have gibbons and birds and orangutans moving through this area that was once just a bird peatland. So really the presence and the efforts by our Indonesian colleagues in the station has promoted the conservation of an incredibly valuable habitat. Next. And I'm just going to briefly discuss some of the main foci of our research at the Tuan Orangutan Research Station. And the research that I conduct with my colleague and my counterpart, Dr. Suci Utan at Vogel, really focuses on nutrition and health of wild orangutans, and really gaining an understanding how natural variation in ecology, but also anthropogenic change to the habitat has affected the health of these animals. Next. Now, a lot of people ask me, why orangutans? I studied capuchin monkeys when I did my PhD, and then I went to study orangutans. But orangutans, even though they separated from the human lineage about 14 million years ago, and we know chimpanzees are more closely related to humans than orangutans, orangutans actually have a lot of similar characteristics to humans in terms of their metabolism and their physiology. Next. For one thing is, we know that just like humans, when you place orangutans in an energy-rich environment with high carbohydrates and fat food sources, they gain a lot of weight in captivity, and very rapidly, more so than any other non-human primate in the world. So if you talk to zookeepers or any of the veterinarians at the rehabilitation centers in Indonesia, they will tell you that the orangutans can get really fat if they don't watch their diets. Next. And the rainforests in Southeast Asia are really unique. They're very different than African rainforests or rainforests in the Americas. These rainforests have unpredictable variation in the availability of fruit. Next. So if you are the largest arboreal, so living in trees, mammal in the world, and you like to eat a lot of fruit, you have to figure out how to survive when there's no fruit available. So that's really what our research focuses on. Next. And what's interesting is that this is the type of environment on the African savannas that presumably our own species evolved in. So our ancestors evolved in an environment that was very unpredictable. Next. So when I talk about energetics and energy balance, all I'm really talking about is something that we all know very well, right? When you eat more food than you burn, you gain weight. That's called a positive energy balance, right? So if we go, we eat a ton of really good French cuisine that's really high in fat, we gain, and we don't go and exercise, and we keep doing that, we're gonna start gaining weight. Next. But when we don't eat a lot and we exercise a lot, so if our energy input is less than our expenditure, what we're burning, then we go into a negative energy balance. And this is exactly what I study in wild orangutans. Next. What's interesting is that this job has been ranked as one of the top worst jobs in science. Because the only way that we can monitor their health is by collecting their urine. Because these are wild orangutans, we can't capture them. Their site is protected. They're critically endangered. So instead, every morning when they come out of their nest, we stand under a tree with a bag and a stick, and we capture their urine. We put it into vials so that we can analyze it and analyze their health, just like you would do when your doctor asks you for a urine sample. Next. And so we can look at the foods that they're eating, quantify the nutrition of those foods, we collect their urine, and then we can analyze these samples in our laboratory. And this is a picture of one of my former PhD students, Dr. Didi Prasetyo, who now works with USAID in Indonesia. Next. And so we can, in my laboratory, in the laboratories that we work with at Bryn, we can look at all of these different markers of energetic stress and health. So for example, neopterin is a marker of inflammation, and C-peptide of insulin is a marker of sugar. That's you can analyze in urine. Next. And so what we found is that during these periods of high food vitamins, orangutans eat a lot. They can eat up to 8,000 calories in a day. They have really high caloric intake. They eat a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of fats from these fruits, and they overconsume. And they build up fat stores and they build up muscle mass. But during these low fruit periods, we found that they have low carbohydrate and fat intake. Their protein intake stays about the same because they're feeding on leaves for protein and insects. But they rely on body fat for energy, so they start to metabolize their body fat, and we can look at ketone bodies in their urine to show them. We also see that they're actually starting to use their body protein, so their skeletal muscle, for energy during these really low fruit periods of low caloric intake. Next. And this is some work that was done by one of my postdocs who also worked in Gunung Palung National Park for her PhD work, where we see that during these low fruit periods compared to high fruit periods, all individuals, whether they're adult males, adult females, juveniles, nursing infants, they all decrease their muscle mass during the low fruit period because it's so expensive to maintain. If you don't have a lot of food and you're going to the gym, you're not going to be able to have as good a workout. You're not going to be able to build up that muscle mass. Next. And so what we see is that when sugar intake gets really low, next, they start to really rely on internal fat reserves and other sources of energy like protein. Next. And then when sugar is really super low, then we see this muscle wasting as indicated by stable isotopes, so nitrogen isotopes. They basically start to consume their own body tissue. Next. We also have looked at other forms of nutritional stress in these orangutans. Next. And what we were wondering is, are these periods of caloric restriction actually harmful? Because we know that a lot of new diets are calling for energy restriction or intermittent fasting or these low-calorie diets, right? So we wanted to see, are these harmful in orangutans? Next. And what we found is that during these periods of really high caloric intake, that's when we see the highest amount of oxidative damage to their DNA. And this is also linked to rapid aging. So what we see is that when they're over-consuming their calories, that's when they're experiencing the most stress. Next. And they have the highest levels of inflammation. So neopterin is that marker of inflammation. So when they have high levels of stress, they also have high levels of inflammation. Next. And so these episodes of caloric restriction are most likely really beneficial for the orangutans, and maybe this explains why they have the highest survivorship out of any of the great apes. They also have lived up to 60 years in the wild. Next. So I would say, if we ask that question, are humans like orangutans? I would say we really are. We are both susceptible to fat retention in high energy environments, and we're both adapted to a feast and famine ecology. The only difference is that orangutans experience that feast and famine ecology, and humans in Western societies don't. So most humans, I should say. So perhaps we can think of orangutans as a model for understanding the global obesity epidemic that we're facing today. Next. I also want to talk a little bit, spend a minute on how anthropogenic change in these environments is affecting orangutan health. Next. And as you know, these peatland habitats are subject to severe fires during El Nino years. And we have fought off 2 major fires in 2015 and in 2019 at the site. I should say the Indonesian government, because they were incredible at sending helicopters and dropping giant water bombs over the forest to protect this incredible habitat. And we spent days with the Indonesian army at the field site putting out these fires with our fire team. Next. And after the fires, there was a lot of area that burnt, as you can see in these maps. Next. What we found is that after these fires, the availability of fruit goes down a lot. And the forest changes, and there's long stretches of time when there's very little fruit in the forest. And this has a huge effect on these orangutans. Next. What we saw is that during the smoke period, they have really high stress levels. They have high cortisol. So they're burning fat and they're stressed out because of all the smoke, just like we are when this happens. Next. And they also have very high levels of oxidative damage to their DNA as the exposure to these small particulate matter in the atmosphere, the smoke, increases over time. So the longer these fires go on for, the greater the damage to their DNA, oxidative damage. Next. So these wildfires that we've experienced are certainly having an impact on the human populations, but also on the orangutans and the wildlife. And this is something we continue to study as well. Next. We have a lot of wonderful new research going on at Tuanan, focusing on using biodiversity, insect biodiversity. Now we have 2 eminent Fulbright students that came last year to study insects and are working with faculty from Bryn and have brought their collections to Bryn, Isa and Andrew. We also have several students that are working on expanding the primate research and human fisheries. Next. And we also have a really different conservation strategy that involves promoting alternative livelihoods and environmental education programs along the Kapuas River. Next. And that also promotes biodiversity. Next. So for alternative data collection that we've had in the past. Next. And they also go to other communities to speak about the work they do and the research they do. So we've brought them to several villages along the river, and we've also brought them to see other research projects in Hollywood National Park in Java. Next. And we've also done a lot of community building. We built an elementary school in the village. We have worked on clean water programs and garbage removal. And during the COVID epidemic, we worked with the local Kepala Desa to expand the program and distribute protective equipment to everyone in the communities during the COVID epidemic. Next. And of course, we also ran an environmental education program with our NGO and Universitas Nasional partnership. Next. 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 Sorry. So I want to end with that. I really think there's hope. I have been so privileged to work with so many incredible Indonesian students. Every time I go back, I go to Indonesia twice a year, usually the month of November, and for the summer, I get to work with Indonesian students at the research station and at UNAS. And I really think there's hope for this population. We have seen an incredible drop in rates of deforestation over the past 5 years in Indonesia throughout the entire country. And compared to other countries and tropical countries, Indonesia is decreasing, everywhere else is increasing. So I know that Indonesia is heavily invested in biodiversity and creating sustainable ecotourism programs, and I look forward to being a part of that in the future. Next. So I want to thank all of our partners and all of the students that have worked with us over the years. Next. and of course all of the agencies that have allowed this research to take place in Indonesia and supported this long-term collaboration with Universitas Nasional. So thank you so much for inviting me.